We have a prime minister who has childhood asthma. Any asthmatic knows what you put into the air, you put into yourself. And yet this prime minister says to do something about climate change is crazy economics. Literally crazy economics.
Summer wildfires in the US and Canada have burned millions of hectares and forced evacuations up and down the continent. Here in BC, we're known for our wet climate, but at one point, around half the province was covered in smoke, and we lost more homes than in any year since 2003. Now, this is happening with the world facing its hottest year ever. And in BC, that meant a strangely mild winter and a very hot summer with record drought and heat. So it seems like climate change could be playing a role here. We're in BC, traveling from here on the Vancouver coast to the interior to find out. Active fire zones are typically hard for the public to access. We were only allowed into this one because it was partially contained. Are there fire crews like right in that smoky area that we're seeing?
Crews are in there with hose and water right now, starting to put out the fire. And that will make us able to call that area contained once the fire has brought right down and has been put out.
We're hoping to get into the fire zone today. And just in case we do, we have to put on our fire retardant Nomex suits. They're bright orange, very bold, and they're supposedly very warm, so they advised us to kind of wear minimal clothing underneath. So we're driving off-road right now to as close as we can get up the mountain to the fire zone, and then we're going to walk on foot from there. Can you explain why we're seeing smoke and not flames?
It has to do with a lot of different things. The fuel type, so the different kinds of trees and brush and ground fuels in the area, and also the temperature and relative humidity. If these smokes did get a bit of direct sun on them, that could easily turn into flame really quickly. And this is a good example looking around here with a bunch of dead wood on the ground. That is a fuel type that can carry fire really well and that carries quite an intense fire. If the fire were to spread, this would generate enough energy to get it up into the canopies.
Are there a lot of areas where the burn is so deep that after the winter comes, they'll just spring up again?
That has happened in areas with especially deep duff layers, so where there's combustible material that is more than 5 or 10 centimeters deep, then it can certainly carry over the winter and come back in the spring.
How deep do you have to dig?
That just depends. As you can see here, the mineral soil isn't that deep down. And you just feel around the edges. See if it's still hot.
Oh yeah, it's really warm.
You really have to use your hand tools. Open them up.
Okay, understood. Thanks, man. Yeah, we'll work on this other little mission here for a bit.
Is it easy to work with all this radio chatter going on?
You know, you get used to hearing your own call sign. It's a crucial part of our whole operation here, in case something picks up.
What was the worst year?
I guess that'd be 2003, 2009. It's been kind of one of those years this year.
The BC Fire Service calls 2003 one of the most catastrophic fire seasons in the province's recorded history. Severe droughts led to never-before-seen conditions that have become more common since then. Yet, this has been one of the worst years you've seen?
It's up there. And bringing outside resources in, you know, help from other provinces.
When did you start fighting fires this summer?
Was it late March or early April? We got rolling pretty early.
And so you've been to a bunch of different fires all summer?
Yeah, this is our 6th deployment.
And what's it been like?
Yeah, it's been pretty non-stop all over the province, up north and then down to Pemberton and kind of all over the map.
How many years have we done this for?
This is my 4th season.
Okay, and how does this compare to previous years?
It's definitely been the hottest and busiest one I've ever experienced.
Is this a full-time job for you guys?
No, seasonal.
Seasonal, okay. So what do you do in the off-season?
I just graduated from forestry at UBC.
The regular season for most people is about 4 months. A lot of people are university students, like we were, and now that we're not in school, we're here around 8 months out of the year. But this year it's been really busy, so we're probably going to be putting in work until the fall.
So we're getting into the helicopter to go survey the fire here in Oliver. There's a lot of activity right now, so we're going to try to stay out of the way of the fire crews that are battling this, but we're going to go out there and see what's going on. Crews still don't know what caused this fire, but it spread quickly and breached several guard lines while we were there. A new fire so late in the summer is unusual, but crews have been seeing new fires start later and later every year. British Columbia has an annual fire budget of $63 million. And so far this year, they've already spent more than 3 times that, around $200 million. The fires have burned over 303,000 hectares. That's an area more than 26 times the size of Vancouver. So Lori, where are we right now?
So we are standing on the boundary of the Boulder Creek fire, which burned this summer, ignited through lightning. So here we're standing in an area that burned at what we call high intensity, so very hot temperatures when the fire was burning. This is a fire that burned in the crowns, it burned all of the surface material, and it burned down into the soil and burned up the organics down below the soil surface as well. Many of the fires in our dry interior forests burned at low intensity fairly frequently, once every 10 to 40 or 50 years. And those are the fires with lower intensity that burn along the surface, damage the trunks of the trees with the thick bark, but those thick bark trees actually survive. And so what you end up with is the lower severity fires acting like a cleansing agent. Those are also, though, the fires that we have very, very effectively in the past 60 years of active fire suppression gone in and identified them and put them out as soon as they started. And we did that with good intentions to protect the forest, but what we've ended up doing is allowing fuels to build up. Now, when you do get hot, dry conditions and a lightning strike, now you have much more fuel. And it's kind of the difference between a campfire and a bonfire. If we're going to adapt to climate change and adapt and accept that fire is an important part of our ecosystems, we have to let more fires burn, and we have to actually cut some trees to eliminate some of the fuels to control the fire behavior. This is a nice example also where the fire burned into that subsurface. So you can see here where the fire's burned down below the roots into the ground, and it's left this white ash. So that's kind of a waxy coating. When the fire burns really hot like this, it creates what we call a hydrophobic soil. So a water shedding soil. And so instead of the water, when it starts to rain again, infiltrating into the soil and sinking down into the soil as it would normally do, it begins to have to pool and then run off along the surface. If we look at the hill slopes around us, you get a tremendous amount of runoff, and it brings with it fine sediments and puts us at risk in these mountainous burned areas of debris flows and flooding as a result.
After seeing the huge amounts of damage the fires have caused at just one fire zone, it's clear more than just the forest will be affected. I want to find out what that means for the ecosystem.
When we talk about habitat degradation, this is one of the key components. This clean, clear substrate and water quality is really critical to salmon. So when we have events like forest fire or landslide, and you get all of that runoff, you get impacts like suffocation of eggs.
Can the salmon adapt to that?
No. Let's say long term, perhaps, yes, salmon could adapt. But in the short term, if we're looking at really rapid changes in temperature, they can't change their behavior quickly enough to keep up with temperature changes in the watershed. When you lose those cooler, permanent summer streams, you lose that run.
We're on the territory of the Lil'wat First Nation. They're the indigenous people of this area, and we want to find out how the wildfires have affected them. So we're going to talk to Jordan, who's the forester for Lil'wat.
So this was an early fire this year. That the fire was started in April. Everything was early, probably about 3 weeks earlier than usual. This fire here went from being a little spot burn. The wind picked it up because there was so much more heat this year. Within 2 hours, it got to be about 1 hectare in size. The smoke was really bad here. We could not even see probably 100 feet.
First Nations use small fires both to generate a food source and to prevent large destructive fires. Areas that have recently burned grow small plants like berries and mushrooms almost right away in the ash. How long has the government been stopping Lil'wat from doing its controlled burns?
I think it comes from pretty well around the 1930s to 40s. So, I mean, we got 75-year-old. They've only seen it when they've been a kid. I mean, when you look at it, it could benefit the whole community, right? Even a lot of the non-natives are out there picking herbs and berries and mushrooms and everything that grow after you burn through an area. I mean, look at all the green that came up after this, and this happened in April.
And for the future, are people worried that this could become the norm?
This is the second time that they've seen it get this dry, and it's getting drier. You couldn't even put a lighter or a match to any of these brush, and it would have burned.
It seems that with all these fires, there must be a connection to climate change, but we're going to talk to Simon Donner, who's a climatologist at UBC, to find out if that's actually true. Is climate change causing the wildfires?
Well, climate change is definitely playing a role in the wildfires. We had fires before there was climate change, and we'll have fires after there's climate change. But with the planet warming and with particularly drier winters and some drier summers and warmer weather, we're going to see more frequent and larger wildfires.
What about the data tells you that?
Well, it's about the increases in temperature in the West, particularly in Canada, where Canada's warming faster than the rest of the planet on average. Last winter was a real reminder to people in BC that climate change is affecting us as well. We had exactly what we're expecting to see in the future. We had a really warm winter. The stuff that fell out of the sky mostly fell as rain, particularly, at the lower elevations. So you had ski areas that didn't even open. And that then set up the summer for what we experienced. We had a very warm summer, but because the snowpack was so poor in the winter, it set things up for forest fires, it set things up for problems in agriculture, and it set things up for the water restrictions we ended up with here in Vancouver.
And what about the human role in climate change itself?
And so this is where things get complicated. When you try to say, are humans driving an increase in wildfires? So first you have to say, well, are the wildfires being driven by changes in climate? And there's evidence for that, yes. And is climate change being driven by humans? Yes. So you go by the change in events, you can definitely see a link. It's hard, to go from your neighbor driving his or her Hummer to work and concluding that because they did that, you're getting a fire, in the Okanagan Valley. But it's still a linked chain, like it's there.
And how do you rate Canada's effort at the federal level in addressing this?
Canada's really been a laggard sort of on the international stage on addressing climate change. In a way, it's too bad because it would only take a little bit of effort by the federal government to coordinate things going on across the provinces and really have a national impact.
We were supposed to talk to Steve Thompson, the BC Minister of Forests, about the funding for fighting fires, their response to them, and the province's plans now that these fires are getting bigger. But he canceled on us at the last minute. When you saw Vancouver covered in smoke by these wildfires this summer, what did you think?
This is a terrible thing about being an environmentalist is while it was horrifying, at the same time I'm going, God, I hope it lasts. Because you keep asking what is going to be the trigger to make people realize that there are some things more important than just the economy or jobs. I thought Katrina was going to do it in the United States. And I found after Hurricane Katrina, people were asking me, do you think this is global warming? Like There was discussion about that. Then Hurricane Sandy came. And I thought again, wow, you know, that New York City, that's a big deal. And you look at Beijing or you look at India and you see the pollution in the air and you go, maybe this will be the thing. But for me, I hope it was a wake-up call. It was horrifying. It's ironic that once again, BC is at the front line of climate change. I mean, British Columbia, 5 years ago, the northern forests of this province turned bright red. Why? Because the winters aren't cold enough to control a parasite that has always been in the forest. But as long as you had winters in which you had 5-6 days of 40 below, nature controlled that parasite. But now that our winters simply aren't cold enough, mountain pine beetle just exploded and our forest turned red. You know, look at the contrast between Mr. Obama, who went to Alaska, which is oil country, to tell the Alaskans, look, we just can't keep exploring and burning it. We've got to get off this. And yet the Prime Minister of Canada spent 5 days in the Arctic recently and never once mentioned climate change.
How do you think, though, he's been able to survive politically in Canada? Is that in line with the views of most Canadians?
He, I believe, has tried, and with a great deal of success, to suppress any discussions that will impinge on the development of Alberta's tar sands. So you shut down those polar expeditions that are studying the effect of climate change. He's fired hundreds of government scientists. He's basically saying everything scientists do for government has to be vetted through government. We've got a pretty shitty history of managing anything on this earth. The idea that we're going to take over the planet and manage it is lunacy. But I operate on the sense of hope, the hope that if we pull back, nature will surprise us. It's based on the fact that we don't know enough to even say it's too late. You want to ask me what's our best path? Pull back, put fences around people, start limiting what we do to the air, the water, and the soil. We're the problem, we're the crisis. We've got to pull back.